This is Roman Davis with Cascade Media. Today, I have a special guest to me and also Kansas City. It's an elder that I met years ago and kind of been learning from and following as he moves through different circles, providing different pieces of information. So I'm going to go ahead and let him introduce yourself, and then we will get into today's broadcast. So please introduce yourself.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I've been a fan of Cascade Media for a while, and I've known Brother Carlos forever. And so anytime I'm asked to do something for Cascade, I'm always willing to do it. My name is Mackey Dean, and today I'm representing the KC Reparations Coalition. We're a group here in Kansas City that's trying to promote local reparations. I think a lot of people are familiar with reparations on a national level. We'll say a couple of things about that. But there are a lot of cities that are engaging in local reparations initiatives, and our local coalition is doing that. We were formed back in November of 2020. Initially, it consisted of about 8 local organizations, civil rights organizations, activist organizations, including my organization, which is the National Black United Front Kansas City chapter, Sankofa for KC, Nation of Islam, Real Justice Network, SCL, CNAACP, Urban League. Maybe 1 or 2 that I'm forgetting right now, but our goal is to develop a reparations proposal for Kansas City because we think that if you look at the history of Kansas City government institutions in Kansas City have historically harmed Black people, and just like we're asking the federal government to pay, we want local institutions and local government to pay. So that's basically what we're doing right now, and that's the KC Reparations Coalition. And we're always open for anybody that wants to help do some work on reparations. Just contact us and we'll try to get you involved.
Okay, I appreciate that insight, Mr. Dean. And for those that don't know, his name is Mr. Dean. You'll probably see him around, and definitely pay attention close as we go through the PowerPoint presentation that he has also presented several times. So we're going to go ahead and get into that PowerPoint, Mr. Dean. Let me go ahead and share my screen, so that way we can go ahead and get into it.
Well, let me say, first of all, again, KC Reparations Coalition is who I represent. A lot of people hear this term reparations, but when you ask people what does it mean, everybody has a different idea about what reparations mean. And so part of our work has been to try to educate the Black community and really anybody about reparations. There are a lot of myths about reparations. There are a lot of misunderstandings about reparations. So our goal is to try to make sure that people understand some of the history of reparations, while we still talk about it, and what it could possibly mean for the advancement of Black people. So reparations now is our slogan. That's kind of the slogan around the country. Now is the time for reparations.
Okay. And if you can give a little bit of background, what is reparations for those people who may not know?
Well, the root word of reparations is repair. And the fact of the matter is that Black people have been damaged since we've been on these shores in North America, and really wherever we've been. And so not only did that damage occur during the enslavement period, which we'll talk about, but also from that point forward, this country's institutions, the government, state, local, federal governments, educational, healthcare, criminal justice, all of these institutions have damaged Black people. And so what we're asking for is compensation for the damage. This is not, like a civil rights bill, or we're not asking for a handout or for equity and diversity. This is what we are owed. And so what we're saying is that Black people are owed compensation for the damage that has been done to us. It has not been paid. And we think that it is time for this country to pay us what they owe us.
I definitely agree with that. And so reparations, you're speaking about, there are around the world where Black people are owed reparations. And I know there are different institutes, different times where reparations have been paid, where you have people who were paid who experienced the Holocaust. You also have members of the Japanese family who were also paid from the United States. at one point for reparations. And so taking it back to when reparations was first, I guess, brought up, or when some form of equality was being sought. We're going to go to the next slide so you can go ahead and discuss this.
Well, as you know, everybody has heard the term 40 acres and a mule. And a lot of people are not clear exactly where that came from. The origin of 40 acres and a mule is that near the end of the Civil War, President Lincoln realized that once black folks were emancipated, the question was, they don't have anything. What are they going to do? And it was a question that he tried to answer. And so he instructed General Sherman to meet with some black people and find out what was it that they wanted. So General Sherman actually met with some ministers in Savannah and asked them, once emancipation occurs, what is it that you all want to sustain yourself? Now, these gentlemen did not ask for voting rights. They didn't ask for civil rights legislation. What they asked for was land. They said, give us land and give us for a period of years the tools to take care of ourselves, and we'll be okay. And so on the basis of that, General Sherman issued what was called Field Order 15. And Field Order 15 was to confiscate 400,000 acres of land from the Confederacy, the Confederates. And this land would be sectioned in 40-acre parcels. Now, this land went from Charleston, South Carolina, all the way down the coastline of Jacksonville, Florida, 30 miles in. We're talking about 400,000 acres of land. And that was the land that was granted to the newly freed enslaved Africans. A lot of those Africans began to move on that land. They began to set up neighborhoods on that land. Now, the other thing that he asked them was, do you all want to be integrated into the rest of society? Do you want to be on your own? And they said, we want to be on our own. Just give us the land, give us the tools of implementation for a few years, and we'll be on our own. And so that was in progress. Now, as you know, Abraham Lincoln was assassinated. Not too long after that, President Andrew Johnson came to office. Johnson was friendly to the Confederates, and Andrew Johnson then rescinded Field Order 15, and those black folks were kicked off that land, and the land was returned to the Confederates who owned it. And so that's what happened to the 40 acres and a mule. So, but we still own that 40 acres and a mule. So,
Right.
so that's kind of the history of the whole 40 acres and a mule story. This was something that actually happened. And the government had some leftover mules, so the mule came in as you could have a mule as part of the leftover government mules. But this is what was allotted to black people shortly after the Civil War.
And the thing that the 40 acres and a mule, I'm glad you cleared that up, because a lot of people believe that is just a myth and a slogan, but it was something actual tangible. Could you explain what is the value of having the land then, and what is also the value of still having land and resources now?
Well, there have been people, and I don't have the numbers in front of me, that have calculated what the value of those 400,000 acres would be in today's numbers. But I will tell you this: had we been able to seize hold of those 400,000 acres at that time, and possibly some other land, I can guarantee you that all of the ills, or at least most of the ills that we face today, would not be there, because land is sort of the basis of wealth, and we would have been able to develop those communities, develop homes, develop neighborhoods, develop towns, and I think that we could be mostly self-sufficient, at least to the extent that you can be in this situation. And so that was a tremendous loss. And it might behoove people to take a look at some resources and just look it up. What would be the value of 400,000 acres of land? This we're talking about in the Southeast, which is prime agricultural land. So it was a tremendous loss.
I would agree with that. And even speaking to my generation, there's starting to be a trend where my generation and younger are really starting to look at land and understanding the value of real estate and how to gain value from that. And so, although that was a loss that we've taken back then, thanks to people like you and groups around the world still putting in work for reparations, this fight is still not over. And also, people in my generation from different sectors promoting gaining land, gaining resources instead of just the chains and cars and things to show off, but gaining things that are tangible and of value. And so, my perspective is, we also are owed reparations for things that were done to our great grandparents and grandparents and parents. But we also owe ourselves reparation by investing in ourselves, gathering those resources as well. And so we're going to go ahead and go to the next slide.
Yeah, and I might, as you go to the next slide, I might add that confiscating land from Black people is something that continued even long after the Civil War. Back in the early part of the 20th century, early 1900s, Black people owned several millions of acres of land. Black farmers were plentiful, and but due to terror, theft, legal chicanery, most Black people lost their land. Bruce Beach, I think, is just a current example. That's the beach in California that's been in the news lately, where that land was returned to that family. But that's something that occurred all over the country. I was in my home state is Georgia, and I was down in the southeastern part of Georgia. There are islands, Jekyll Island, St. Simon's Islands, etc. And once upon a time, those islands were owned by ex-enslaved Africans, by Black people. Now, of course, the developers moved in, they took the land, and now I think on St. Simon's Island, that land is over $3,000 an acre or something like that. Hilton Head is a famous golf resort that people hear a lot about.
Mm-hmm.
That land was owned by Black people. So it's just been a continuous process of taking land from Black people. So I just want to mention that the confiscation of those 40,000 acres is not the only time that Black people have had their land taken. This slide talks about some of the early reparations efforts, because some of this, particularly in the case of Belinda Royal, occurred before the Civil War. Belinda Royal was a person who was a woman who was enslaved by a family called Royal in Massachusetts. But she was abandoned by her enslavers. So in 1983, she petitioned the Massachusetts General Court for a pension from her enslaved estate for her work. And she was actually awarded 15 pounds and 12 shillings. And so this was really one of the first known reparations payments to Black people. Better known is Callie House. Callie House started what was called the National Ex-Slave Mutual Relief Bounty and Pension Association. It was one of the first organizations to attempt to campaign for slave reparations. It was chartered in 1898, and the goal was to petition Congress for reparations and to provide funds for mutual aid and for burials. Back in the early days, Black people survived off mutual aid funds. This is before insurance. And at its height, it had about 300,000 members. But because of the success of the movement, Callie House was constantly under attack. The government said she was defrauding people because they would put money into the fund, and the fund was being used for mutual aid. And eventually, she was convicted of fraud in 1916, and she was sent to prison for a year. And in fact, she was in prison in Jeff City in Missouri. But Callie House, there's a book that was written by Mary Frances Berry. It's called "My Face is Black is True." It's an excellent account of Callie House's story, and I would encourage everybody to read it.
Thank you for sharing that history on the early reparations. I never knew about the Callie House story, and that just goes to show that the fight has continued since the beginning, and it continues to this day.
Reparations from all the way back to Belinda Royal up until today, Black folks have demanded payment for the free labor And the Queen Mother Moore, Holly Queen Mother Moore, is considered the mother of the modern reparations movement. She's a remarkable woman. Her activism spans. She was a member of Marcus Garvey's United Improvement Association, and this was back in the 1920s. And I actually saw her. She was a speaker at the Million Man March in 1995 or 96, whenever that was. So as you can see, her history of activity, activism is spanned decades. But she back in 1957, she presented a petition to the United Nations which demanded land and billions of dollars in reparations for people of African descent, and also requested support for any Black folks that wanted to immigrate back to Africa. In 1963, she founded what was called the Committee for Reparations of Descendants of the U.S. Slaves. She's also a founder of the Republic of New Africa. She was just a tremendous advocate for reparations. Some of y'all may remember 50 years ago, there was in Gary, Indiana, the National Black Political Convention. And there are some film clips of that convention. And in those film clips, one of the things you'll see is Queen Mother Moore out among the people handing out flyers on reparations. So she was a reparations advocate for all of her life. Right. And she was really a tremendous person. So she's another person that, if you don't know Otley Queen Mother Moore, do some research on her, because she's a person that you should know.
Yeah, there's a lot of information that people could look up on YouTube just by searching her name, that will give great insight about her progress and the different things that she's done. That's a good one to share.
Yeah, and also the Honorable Elijah Muhammad in the Nation of Islam. Reparations was one of their mans back as early as 1950. That's not on the slide, but I don't want to exclude the Nation of Islam because they also were proponent of reparations. The two organizations that are most predominant today, one is in COBRA, the National Coalition for Black Reparations in America. And in fact, that name on it is not exactly right. It's the National Coalition for Black Reparations in America. And COBRA was formed in 1987. It was basically formed to broaden the base of support for the reparations movement. I've been a member of COBRA for quite some time now. And COBRA was really the organization that has really kept the reparations movement going over the last at least 30 or 40 years or so. 2015, the National African American Reparations Commission was founded, and it's sort of an umbrella organization. And it's basically designed to coordinate all of the organizations and individuals in the reparations movement. We are affiliated with NARC also, and they work, of course, hand in hand within COBRA. So those are the two main organizations today that are supporting the reparations movement is on the national level.
Okay, and for those watching, it's easy to go to those websites and you can find history on what those particular groups have been doing. You also can find information on the national reparations movement, and also you can join these organizations to help support the cause.
Absolutely. Reparations is more than payment for slavery. I think if you ask people about reparations, the first thing they think about is a check. Where's my check?
Right.
And so that's basically what people think of when they think about reparations. They want to get paid for the free labor. And sure enough, and one of the things you hear is that, well, why are we talking about reparations now? Slavery was a long time ago.
Yeah.
And what you hear from a lot of opponents of slavery is that my family didn't own any slave. You weren't a slave, so why are we still talking about this? But to talk about the period of chattel slavery that lasted up to 1865, it's estimated that the value of enslaved Black people in 1860 would be $22 trillion in today's money. And that the value of uncompensated labor from 1619 to 1865 is $50 trillion. It's very clear that the initial accumulation of capital of the United States, because everybody talks about what a great country the United States is, but the initial accumulation of capital was built on primarily on slave labor and also on the decimation of the Native American people and taking of their land. But that's how the United States gained its initial wealth, through slave labor and through confiscating and basically destroying a lot of the Native American culture. Also should mention and this is another thing, people should at least look up the Homestead Act of 1862. Now, this is an act that was put in place before before the Civil War ended. What it did was it distributed 246 million acres of land to 1.5 million families for over 60 years. And this was when the United States was trying to get a lot of European immigrants to come to this country because they were moving westward, and they wanted people to populate that land as they kicked the native people off their land. And so the Homestead Act was now, if you read about the Homestead Act, it just basically is very neutral. It just says that any family could claim their 200, I think it was like 126 acres each for each family or something like that. But the reality is that is over 99% of that land went to white families. Okay, so this is another opportunity. And white people, they want to complain about affirmative action and black people get handouts. White people have had affirmative action from the time that they set foot in this country. And this was a major component of that. And again, it's estimated that up to 93 million white Americans today are direct beneficiaries of this program. So when you look at,
I'm sorry, Mr. D. So what you're saying is that, when before black people were released from slavery, they were giving hundreds of acres away to immigrants. And then, from my understanding, when slavery was over, reparations were actually paid to slave owners who lost money from slaves. Could you touch on that?
Yeah, there was actually an act in Congress where former people who held enslaved Africans were compensated for, quote, the loss of their property. So that's another, when we talk about reparations there, you look back at that's another slap in the face, how slave owners could be compensated for lost property. And of course, we can't be compensated for the free labor that we provided.
Yeah, and what it does is, to me, it sounds like a huge exchange of wealth where you release the slaves with nothing, and expecting them to pull themselves up by their bootstraps, but then you compensate those who were profiting from those slaves and you give them an upper hand up. It sounds like a double slap in the face to the former slaves. And I'm of the mentality, if Black people, if somebody owes us money, hey, we're going to get it. And so what we're looking at is the federal government owes your great grandparents money, and they also owe your grandparents money. They owe your parents money, and therefore they also owe you money. And that's just speaking on the slavery, and we're just talking about the labor cost. We aren't talking about the damages from breaking up families, from the damage of experiencing families being broken up, and all the different forms of, I guess, brutality that people would speak or would experience while going through slavery.
Yeah, and let me just move ahead. What we're talking about is that in terms of damage done to Black people, it wasn't just during the enslavement period. Now, there was a period of reconciliation during the Reconstruction era, where this is when you had, if you look at a lot of the legislative bodies in the South, you had Black people elected to legislative bodies in the South, Black people elected to Congress, etc. But that ended, and then the Jim Crow era ensued. And of course, we know about Jim Crow. One of the main things was sharecropping, and this sharecropping was just basically a new form of slavery. So was convict labor. That was another system. There was just about everything that Black people did was criminalized, and they could be arrested for anything. And then once they were arrested, then they could be leased out to the plantation. So plantation owners was almost getting the same thing in terms of sharecropping and in terms of convict labor as slave labor. And so that was one of the ways that, again, wealth was extracted from Black people. We know about all of the other stuff during the Jim Crow era, the theft of land, employment discrimination. One thing though that I really want to touch on is people learn in school about the New Deal, and the New Deal had to do with Social Security and the GI Bill. The interesting thing about Social Security is that when it was enacted, two groups of people were excluded. This was back in the 40s: domestic workers and agricultural workers. And Black people, I think about 70% of Black people at that time were either domestics, which means that they worked for white folks, or they were agricultural workers. They were excluded, and they were excluded specifically by the Southern legislators, because they felt that if Black people had any other option other than working for them, that it could reduce the amount of Black labor that was available. So this was another way, this safety net that was created that was only available primarily to white people. The GI Bill was the same thing. This was a bill when, after the end of World War II, returning servicemen could get mortgages. They could get mortgages. They could get education money. Less than 2% of that money went to Black people. So again, these are just other advantages that white people were given. And of course, home ownership is one of the main ways that there's the wealth creation of families, and Black people were denied that opportunity for mortgages, et cetera. So redlining, other forms of housing discrimination, separate and unequal education, all of that occurred during the Jim Crow era. So we're talking about compensation for that era also. And then a quick thing about the mass incarceration and the wealth gap. These draconian drug laws were designed to basically trap people into the penal system. The penal system has been another source of wealth creation for corporations. There's practically free labor in the prison systems, because those sisters and brothers are working in there for pennies on the dollar.
Right.
And then, of course, the current wealth gap. I just want to mention that if you look at any of the studies on the wealth gap, it'll show you that the wealth gap between Black and white is about 10 to 1. And the data says that absent some type of a massive transfer of wealth, it would take about 230 years, just based on the regular kinds of programs, the affirmative action and the civil rights laws, et cetera, that there's just no way Black people are going to catch up without some type of massive intervention.
And you hit on a very good point, because even within that, what I want people to think about as they look at this slide and see where we came from with chattel slavery to Jim Crow to mass incarceration is that you have to look at history not in a vacuum, but as a progression and growth. And so slavery was the foundation of America, where Black people were the commodity and the workforce. And so you just look at the systems and how they continue to grow, where you say there was slavery, then we got out of slavery, but then you start to have different laws to then keep people in some form of slavery. And that's where you get into the mass incarceration, where essentially if you are in jail, you essentially lose your freedom and you are working under essentially slave conditions, to my understanding. So what I want people to think about our current situation in which Black people are in, and then think about how we actually got here and understand what we should be compensated for. And I know Dr. William Darity does a good job of breaking that down in his book, From Here to Equity. But I'm gonna go ahead and go on to the next slide.
A lot of people say, well, what would reparations look like? And like I said, most people talk about the check. Direct payments, in fact, are a part of reparatory justice, but there are a lot of ways that Black people can be compensated. Land is one. These are just a few: community development funds, tax relief, free health care, funds for housing, scholarships. I mean, there's just so many ways that we can be compensated compensated for our damage done to us, other than just a check. So we always want to make clear to people that it's not just about a check, because that's what most people hear about, and that's what they know reparations to be.
And I would definitely agree with that. And usually that is one of the arguments that people will say, well, I've heard people say, Black people would just spend the money and give it back to white people, or waste it or blow it, when the fundamental principle is it is money that is owed to them. So whether someone chooses to blow the money, whether they choose to invest it with white people, whether they choose to move out of the United States, whether they choose to buy land, that is their own personal business. So it's not about what people will actually do with the money. It's about giving what is owed to people and
Yeah,
what people actually deserve.
me coming to your job and you work for your check, and I said, well, I don't think you should get that check because you don't know how you're gonna spend it. But let me just say one other thing that we don't talk about a lot is a concept of internal reparations, because most of these things that you see here are things that we're demanding from those that did harm to us. Internal reparations deal with the mental damage that's been done to Black people over the years through the type of education that we've had, the type of self-hate that has been imposed upon us. And this is one of those things that we've got to do on our own. We've got to have some culturally competent people in the mental field who can really work with our people about what the damage that has been done to us mentally, because a lot of times we do things that harm ourselves as a people, and that's just because of the historical conditioning that we've had, and this feeling of inferiority. So there's a lot of work that we have to do internally to fix ourselves mentally and psychologically, because we are a damaged people.
And I couldn't say it any better than the way that you just phrased it. And that the reparations that we are owed externally, we definitely owe ourselves internally to repair that damage and to make sure that we break generational curses, and to make sure that we can definitely send our children into a better trajectory. So I'm glad you touched base on different forms of reparations. And you explain that, it doesn't necessarily come in the form of money, direct payments, community development funds, scholarships. There are many ways that it could come across, but some of the proponents in opposition would say, they aren't responsible for reparations. We should get over it, and different things like that. Or how can the nation actually afford reparations? Could you please touch base on that from your perspective?
Well, it's interesting that if you look at how this government found money to send to Ukraine, look at the amount of money that this government spends on the military budget every year. Look how this government came up with money for COVID release. All of a sudden, and we're not talking about all of this happening all at once. But clearly, the United States has the ability to do this over a period of time, and I think you mentioned Darity's book. I think he discusses that in his book. But no, we think that it's there, and this country can find money for whatever it needs to find money for, and so that's just not an acceptable excuse to us.
I would definitely agree with that. Which leads to current progress and where we're at today, with the fight for reparations. So we're ready to hear where we're at right now, Mr. Dean.
Well, here's the thing, Brother Roman. I've been I'm a member of the National Black United Front. We were founded in 1981, and one of the things that's in our Constitution is the demand for reparations. So this is something that we've been an issue that we've been on for a number of years. Truth of the matter is that 10 years ago, when we would talk to people about reparations, we kind of get the side out. People that say, well, yeah, but that's a pipe dream. It'll never happen. And so this whole reparations issue really wasn't getting much traction.
Right.
I would ask people to take a look at, and you can find it online, the June 2014 issue of the Atlantic magazine. And there's an article called "The Case for Reparations," and it was written by Ta-Nehisi Coates. When that article came out, we're talking about 8 years ago, what it did was it brought the reparations issue back to the forefront. And even though Brother Coates he's not an expert on reparations, but he just did a deep dive into he did what was going on in Chicago with the housing thing, and that just based on that, he just built the case for reparations. And so after that, it became a subject of discussion again. The next thing that happened was that based on the fact that the movement for reparations was being revived in the I believe it was the 2016 election, is when, it might have been 2020, when all of the candidates began to talk about, all of the candidates pledged that they would do something for reparations. I think it was 2016.
Right. Yeah.
Even Joe Biden, all of these candidates say, yeah, we think that HR 40 is important. Now, a lot of that was just political. These folks were trying to get votes, but it did because of the fact that presidential candidates were now talking about reparations. It really, this was now a discussion that was front and center. And then, of course, after the George Floyd incident, then every issue in the Black community was up for discussion, and reparations became even more prominent. So nowadays, this is not a foreign subject. There are still a lot of our people that are not sure about reparations, whether or not it's possible, but at least it's a discussion now, and it's not one of these things where people giggle behind your back when you talk about reparations, because I guarantee you that's what used to happen when we used to raise this issue of reparations. But we've stayed the course on that. HR 40, I want to talk about HR 40. HR 40 is the legislation that's in Congress that is designed to set up a commission. Initially, when John Conyers, the congressman from Michigan, first introduced it back in I think it was 1989 when he first introduced it. It was a study bill to study whether or not Black people deserve reparations. The HR 40 was rewritten in, I believe it was 2017, because our position was that all of the evidence was there in terms of what had happened to Black people, the damage, and the fact that we were old. And so now the language of HR 40 is basically designed to determine what form would reparations look like, not whether or not we're old or not, but how would we address it practically in terms of what forms, who's eligible, because there's a lot of discussion about who's eligible for reparations, but that's what 1840 is, HR 40. And of course, it was named after the whole 40 acres and a mule. That's why it's HR 40.
Okay.
It is led now by Congresswoman from Houston, Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee. After Conyers left Congress, then she took the mantle, and John Conyers would introduce this bill every year, every single year, and it never got out of committee. Okay, until last year. So last year, this bill was discussed in the Judiciary Committee, and for the first time, the bill was voted out of committee. And I remember that day well, because we were all on a national reparations Zoom call and Zoom meeting, and it was euphoria when we found out that the Judiciary Committee had voted it out of committee, which meant that it was now right to be taken to the floor of Congress for a vote. Now, remember, we're talking about the spring of 2021, I believe it was April or May. And to this date, that bill has not reached the floor of the House of Representatives. Of course, in the House, there's 435 members, so you need 218 to pass legislation. There were initially about 170 co-sponsors of HR 40. That then went up to 190 or so. And right now, in the reparations movement, we know that we have the 218 votes necessary for this legislation to pass in the House of Representatives. Now, obviously, there's no chance that a reparations bill will pass in the Senate because the Senate is heavily Republican, and because of that filibuster, you need 60 votes anyway. But the idea is to get this passed in the House of Representatives and then make a demand to President Biden to issue an executive order to establish the commission that HR 40 would do. That's the thing.
Okay.
No, let me just say this though. What has happened is that I mentioned that even though the leaders of the Democratic Party in Congress know that they have the 218 votes, they refuse to bring it to the floor. And the reason being, and this is primarily Nancy Pelosi and James Clyburn of South Carolina, the reason is that they're concerned about the midterm elections in November, and that if they make a big push for this reparations legislation, that it's going to hurt them in terms of their ability to maintain control of Congress in the midterm elections this year. And it's again a case of other people's interests coming before Black people's interests. And again, I'll tell you, Roman, this was historic. After all of these years, here's an opportunity now to actually get this legislation passed, and the House leadership refused to do it for political reasons. And everybody in the reparations movement is basically infuriated by this. And once again, we feel betrayed. It ain't the first time the Democratic Party has betrayed Black people, but this is just another indication of what happens to our interests when the political interests are at stake.
I would agree with you 100% because we also know that the UN had a panel that also believes that America owes reparations to descendants of slaves. Also, currently we have the organization of mayors organized for reparations, in which Quentin Lucas is actually a part of. That is also fighting for local reparations. But as you mentioned, it does need to happen on a federal level. And we are at a very critical moment and a good moment for us because the HR 40 has moved further than it ever has. Reparations is a conversation that can be had out in the open, and it actually has legitimacy behind it because you can track the perseverance and the endurance that people such as yourself and those who came before us have put in and demonstrated, showing that reparations is owed. So it kind of seems like it's on us to, do a lot of that internal healing, so that way a lot of us can feel confident to stand on our own, to stand on our square in order to get what we actually deserve. And what was brought to me, and something that I kind of agree with, is that we're at a point where since other people's needs have been being put before Black people's, is that we should really have tougher stance when we deal with our political figures and those who represent us, to let them know that if they aren't pushing for reparations, then they can't receive our vote. Especially when it comes to those, especially our political candidates and presidents who have been elected and tout how Black women and Black men have got them elected into office. Well, if that's truly the case, then they need to stand on that. And we also need to stand firm in that if they aren't looking out specifically for Black people, in which history has shown that we're owed, which the numbers show that we're owed, and also which we know it can be afforded to pay and compensate in order to repair our nation, and a people, that we have to hold them accountable and hold ourselves accountable to making sure that reparations comes or our support is withdrawn. And I'm not sure how you feel about that stance.
Well, I mean, you're absolutely right. And of course, the argument, and this comes from our so-called leaders in Congress, is that, well, what's the alternative? The Democratic Party, you hear this term, that less of two evils, blah, blah, blah. And of course, when the time comes to go in there and pull that lever, a lot of our people are not going to let go of the Democratic Party, and that in itself is a tragedy, because obviously, historically, Black people are going to vote for us. Is there a logic? And so if there's anybody, because they're trying to win back the middle, as they say, because the Republicans have kind of taken the so-called middle, which they're talking about white folks, really, white folks in the middle, and so they're trying to win back the white folks in the middle, and these are the folks whose votes we really need. Black people are going to vote for us, so we know they're going to vote for us, but we got to really focus on trying to win back the middle, and that's just the way it's been. As you so very clearly stated, Roman, and that's kind of where we are with this, and it's really frustrating and infuriating.
Yeah, and I definitely understand the frustration. And I'm a little younger, so my outlook is a little more positive, and I see momentum being gained. I just encourage those of my generation and younger to really stand and understand what reparations is about, so that way we can stand on the shoulders of the elders, many of who have fought, used time, energy, and sometimes their life, so that way we can have this opportunity in front of us. And it's up to us to understand and value ourselves, so that way we don't waste this opportunity and not fall for any political games, because the party is the people, and it's not about necessarily Democrat or Republican, because at one point the Republicans were more so in favor of policies and stuff that favor Black people, and so it's not about the political game that we should be holding on to, but it's about looking at putting power back into the hands of the people. And if you are one of those people that I would say doesn't believe that politicians shouldn't be trusted and they should be held accountable, then this is ultimately the way that we hold them accountable and hold ourselves accountable. And if critical race theory is a topic that has been heavy on conversation, but as I challenge someone to look at all the issues that Black people have, you can stem those back to the same issues that we are stating that reparations should be paid for. And so again, that brings a whole nother level of accountability.
And I know this is a little bit off the subject, but there are a lot of people in your generation are ready to say the heck with the Democratic Party. That maybe we need some type of independent political movement, if nothing else, to really try to put pressure on our Congress people to do something different. But I think a lot of people are saying, why do we keep kicking the same can down the road year after year after year when we're being disrespected by this party? So that's just another issue.
Oh yeah, yeah, and one of the things that I feel is the reason why Black people hold on to the true value of the vote is because we are missing that economic base to support ourselves in other facets, and so the vote is our biggest piece of representation. Whereas if we had economic wealth and we had resources and land, etc., the value of the vote, it wouldn't be so high, because we can rely on ourselves to make decisions in our communities to support each other, regardless of what the government does. And so really this is a call for us to unite and understand our power and our resource, and to begin to claim that value, so that way we can hold others accountable who we select to represent us. So could we go ahead and move on to, I think we kind of covered the current support for HR 40, but if you want to dive into that a little bit.
Yeah, and in fact, I think that panel is misnamed. I gotta go back and deal with that. So as I mentioned, there are a lot of city resolutions, basically cities saying that we support HR 40. Kansas City passed a resolution back in April of last year. It was unanimous. I mean, the KC Reparations Coalition introduced an ordinance. It was led by Councilwoman Melissa Robinson introduced an ordinance in support of HR 40, and it was passed unanimously by the City Council. Now, of course, they don't have to do anything; it didn't cost them anything, and even at that, I was a little surprised that nobody challenged it, but it was we went down and did a presentation, and it was passed unanimously. There are a lot of cities that have passed resolutions, but just to talk about what's happening now, and by the way, you mentioned the support for HR 40. I mean, it's very widespread. The U.S. Conference of Mayors, the American Civil Liberties Union, all of the national sororities and fraternities, all of the civil rights organizations, a lot of the religious organizations. So the support for HR 40 is just widespread, and that's why it's even more disappointing that the Democratic leaders in Congress won't bring it to the floor. I want to talk a little bit about what's happening in Kansas City. Oh, one other thing I want to mention is that what you'll find across the country is that there are now cracks in this whole reparations, where you're starting to see cracks in the wall and trickling through. A lot of there's been several religious denominations that have examined their history and determined that their religious domination was built either on the labor of enslaved Africans or selling enslaved Africans, and a lot of those institutions. I can't remember the exact, and maybe you know the religious domination that supports Georgetown University, but they were one, and they went back and looked at the history of Georgetown and found out that had it not been for the labor of enslaved Africans, Georgetown would not exist. And so what they're doing is they've set up what they call a reparations fund, and they're trying to find the descendants of those people who did that work and offering them free education. I think there's the Presbyterian Church is another church that basically looked at its history and made the same determination. And closer to home, there's a group of students at William Jewell that did a similar study at William Jewell. They determined that William Jewell himself owned enslaved Africans, and all of the founders of William Jewell own Africans. And in fact, one or two of the buildings that still exist on campus were built with slave labor. So a lot of education institutions are looking to their history and saying that we need to compensate for this, because this was unjust enrichment. And so that's why I'm saying that 10 years ago you would never hear of anything like this taking place, but now a lot of these institutions are looking and saying, we have to do the right thing, and that is to compensate for this free labor. Okay, so that's one thing that I think people should look at. I just want to get to, before we close, what's happening here in Kansas City. As I mentioned, a number of cities, including Kansas City, has passed resolutions to support HR 40. Now the focus is on how do we address the damage that has been done by city governments and by cities and by institutions and cities to their citizens, to their Black citizens. And so what you see now is that a lot of cities are forming reparations commissions to actually study the history of their particular city and to put in place reparations proposals. Evanston, Illinois is the one city in the country that has actually passed reparations legislation and funded it, and they've already began to I think they're giving, they chose home ownership is what they're going to focus on, and eligible recipients are getting $25,000 each. Either to put a down payment on a home, repair a home. But Evanston, Illinois is the first city in the country that actually been paying reparations. You mentioned Moore, the mayor's organized for reparations and equity. And to our surprise, last summer, we found out that our mayor was one of the signees. Or there are like 11 mayors now, and I found this out not from him, but from some other people in the reparations movement, because we weren't sure where the mayor stood on reparations.
Shout out to Mayor Lucas.
Yeah, and in fact, I heard him on a radio interview, and somebody asked the question. He kind of went in circles on it. But once we saw that, we said, okay, and I would encourage people to go to that website, to the mayors organized for reparations equity, and just see what those mayors said that they were going to do. And so what we're trying to do, once we found that out, we contacted Mayor Lucas. We had a meeting with him because we wanted to know what his plans were. Turns out he really didn't have any. And so as a coalition, we decided that, okay, we have to create this agenda for the mayor, because what we want to do is there are some very bold statements in that mission statement from this mayor's group, and we want to hold the mayor to those statements. So what we're doing now is we're in the process of trying to help the mayor form a commission, Mayor's Commission on Reparations, that would actually study what has happened to Black people in Kansas City in what we call 5 injury areas: education, criminal justice, economic/business, healthcare, and housing. So those are the 5 areas, and we want to look at specific examples in Kansas City's history in terms of what the city government and other institutions have done to Black people. We want to identify exactly what the issues are. I think people know the issues. Who's responsible, and what would reparatory justice look like? One good example, a couple of local examples. One is the damage that was done building 71 Highway.
Oh yeah, urban renewal.
Yeah, urban Negro removal, as it's euphemistically called. But there was just a lot of damage, in terms of houses taken, businesses destroyed. To bring this highway right in the middle of the Black community, it caused a lot of loss of wealth. J.C. Nichols was one of the designers of the redlining that took place around the country. He was very influential in the real estate business and influential around the country. And this whole idea of redlining came from J.C. Nichols. And if you look at the amount of wealth that has been lost in the Black community, there's actually a company that does that kind of data analysis, and they actually put some figures to it. So it's those kind of things that we're going to look at. What about the education system? Historically, how have we been damaged?
Mr. Dean, and before you go into the education system, I want to touch on, when cities are looking at the history of how Black people were separated. I challenge and encourage those, whatever municipality that you're in, whether it's Kansas City or Raytown or Lee Summit, look at what urban renewal did, and look at your city codes, because in that is the history of how Black people were actually segregated, redlined, and how urban renewal just wasn't just a highway through the city, but it also occurred in Independence, as I've learned, being in that municipality. And every municipality has their own form of Negro removal, as you would call it, in which we can find the aspects where local reparations should be paid. But I also want those, as you see the local reparations occur and unfold, is to remember that it is a federal issue as well. In the government, the federal government had a big hand to play in that. When you talk about the land redistribution of wealth, etc. But yeah, please go ahead and elaborate. I didn't mean to cut you off, but please go ahead.
Oh, that's fine. No,
yeah,
and I'm just saying that in each one of those areas, I mean, if we go back and look at the healthcare system in Kansas City in terms of the quality of healthcare that Black people got historically in this city, as opposed to the white population. You could just talk about education. We know what's happening in criminal justice in terms of how Black people have been treated by the criminal justice system. So, for example, just one example of reparatory justice and criminal justice may be expunging the records of all of these Black folks that are locked up on weed charges or marijuana charges, just things like that. Get rid of bail, because all bail means is that if you can afford bail, you can get out of jail until it's time for trial. If you can't afford bail, you stay in jail, you lose homes, jobs, everything, and of course that disproportionately affects Black people. We know in terms of the business, the fact that we've had a lack of access to capital, and so we need to examine the role played by these financial institutions in terms of why our businesses have not been able to raise the necessary capital. So in just about every area, and most of the cities are looking at those same 5 injury areas, and a lot of times they'll pick one, they'll pick two, because cities really can't address all of this, right? I mean, they can't really address all of this, and we understand that. And as you mentioned, I mean, that's the role of the federal government. But these cities are also responsible, and we feel the need to hold these cities responsible, and that's what we're trying to do here in Kansas City. Like I said, right now, we're basically trying to solicit people who are interested in working on this reparations commission, who who would like to dedicate themselves to it, because we want to put together a reparations proposal to present to not only the city legislative bodies, but also some of these corporations and health institutions and education institutions that really are responsible for the damage done to Black people. So that's where we are on that, and that's currently what we're working on.
Okay, and I appreciate that update and that insight. And even looking at you brought up the criminal justice system. Even looking at freeing for unfair sentencing, where Black people have received greater sentences, or political prisoners, or those
Right.
such as the Larry Hoover conversation has been discussed, in which he has done different things. But I encourage you, I don't want to get into that myself. But I want to encourage people to look up Larry Hoover and look at our criminal justice system and see different ways in which we have been mistreated. Those my age and younger. And also, I encourage you to get involved in the movement. And it first starts with enlightening yourself and gaining knowledge. And hopefully this video would be the spark to get you started. And also, share this video with your children as well, so that way they can be informed, because they will be the ones reaping the benefits of reparations when they come.
Yeah, and also, let me just add that
yes,
if there's any organization, community group that wants us to come to speak to them about reparations, either in person or on Zoom, we're willing to do that. Right now, we're really going to try to focus on educating our people about reparations, and that's why we appreciate entities like Cascade Media that are really willing, because I've been on before talking about reparations with Carlos a couple of years ago. So any chance we get to talk about this subject, we're willing to do it. We have a Facebook page, KC Reparations Coalition, and that's one way that people contact us. We have an email, KC Reparations Coalition at gmail.com, I believe it is. People can, if they just want to talk to me, they can call me 816-527-6616. I don't mind giving up my number if somebody wants to have some direct conversation about how they can get involved in the reparations movement. But we're out here, we're trying to do this work. We think it's important work, and we just appreciate any support that we get.
Hey, Mr. Dean. Well, first and foremost, I want to thank you for sitting down and having this conversation with me. Second, I want to thank you for the many years of work that you have done, not only with reparations, but helping children, whether it's from tutoring, mentoring, and just being present in a positive light. Those things are very invaluable. Those are priceless. And so, I want to give you some flowers while you're still here and while you're still fighting on our behalf.
Appreciate that, bro.
The last thing and the most important thing that you mentioned, even through our whole reparations discussion, is that we owe ourselves internal reparations. And that is a form of learning who you are, learning where you come from, understanding your likes, your dislikes, setting healthy boundaries, supporting yourself, supporting family, supporting those that look like you. Those are the internal reparations that build you, that build a strong family, and ultimately that make our people stronger, and make when we do receive the reparations that are owed externally, where we'll be able to utilize those in the best way possible to envision a healing and a bettering of our nation and of our people from around the world.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So again,
very well put.
Go ahead. Any closing remarks?
I just said very, very well put. You're absolutely right. And we don't want to forget that aspect of reparations, the internal reparations, because a lot of people don't know that they're damaged, and I can tell you, trying to absolve yourself of all of these Eurocentric tendencies that has been ingrained in us. It's a lifelong process. I hate the term when this term like woke. Are you woke? Well, wokeness is it's on a continuum. You ain't never fully woke, in my opinion. We're always learning something about ourselves and about what's been done to us, and it's just a lifelong process. But we've got to start with our young people. That's why I focus a lot on young people over the years, to try to expose them to things that they're not going to get in the educational system. And so it's just a comprehensive approach to Black liberation is basically what it is. And that's what I've been involved in since I I started marching in those civil rights marches in my hometown when I was back in Georgia when I was 15 years old. So it's been a long time.
Mm. Hey, well, you summed it up. And my closing remarks is to those that are my age and younger, talk to the elders, hear their experiences of what they went through in their past. Ask them about reparations, get their perspective, get their wisdom. Because in these times, we want to rely on the guidance of those who have walked the trails before us, so that way we know how to order our steps and we aren't repeating any wheels, we aren't wasting any time, but we're being efficient for the cause, and we're upholding those traditions that have been passed on and fought for. So thank you again, Mr. Dean, for the interview. I'll definitely be back in contact. And thank you, Kansas City, for tuning in. Together we are stronger. Together we make change, and together we make things better. You all have a good night. Thank you, Mr. Dean.
Black power.
For sure.
This is brought to you by the Black Economic Union, located at 1601 East 18th Street, Kansas City, Missouri.